New all. I now do some part-time work for the South Central Service Co-op, which does superintendent searches for schools that are members of the South Central Service Co-op. Obviously, we're here doing the search for a new superintendent in New Prague. And today you're going to visit with one of the final candidates, Dana Miller, and we're going to ask her to make a few opening comments, and then we're going to ask you to ask her some questions. And if you want to ask a question, raise your hand. I will bring the mic to you so everyone can hear. And because this is live stream, she has to stand up there and use the other mic. So, okay, with that in mind, a few opening statements.
Awesome. Thanks, Harold. Are you okay hearing me too? All right. This is kind of like my dream because I always wanted to like, wah, wah, but no, that's not what I'm supposed to do. This makes me like feel like I need to break out in song, but I have to stand up here, so sorry, it's not really my style. But as Harold said, I'm Dana Miller. I'm here to be one of the final candidates of this superintendent's position. A little bit about myself. I come to education from birth, so I've been doing this a long time. I grew up in an education family, so I've driven a bus. I come from Iowa originally, where we drove bus if we coached, if you can imagine. So I coached and taught at both the middle school and high school level. I've been a high school and middle school counselor, and then I was in Eastern Carver County for about 18 years. I started there as a counselor and left there as a middle school principal, and I also did 2 years there in teaching and learning on special assignment. And then for the last year and a half or so plus, I've been in Wayzata as the executive director of teaching and learning, which is kind of like an associate superintendent job of academics and excellence here. I live in New Prague. I raised my children. They're all grown, or at least their age is grown. They're still not off the payroll. I'm working on that, so if anybody has any suggestions for that. But I raised my children in Jordan, so I've lived in Jordan about 20 years, and then we just moved out to Cedar Lake about 4 years ago, and so I've been here in New Prague ever since then. And so that's part of what brings me here today, is just that desire to serve the community that I live in. And so I think you want to know more about me by asking questions, so I don't know. Hopefully you'll get to know a little bit more about me as we talk, and happy to fill in any gaps if I'm leaving some stuff out. So, and it's really bright, so I'm going to keep just trying to move and see you. So,
okay, with that, is there someone who would like to ask the first question? We need to have a volunteer. There we go.
Love the sweatshirt. All of my graduate work and everything after the Bachelors was at Mankato. So, and I'm old enough it was Mankato. So,
same here. Well, welcome and thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so I wrote it down because whenever I get into these situations, I would get nervous. So,
me too.
Knowing that you would come into a school district that is in a community that voted no most recently for the referendum and levy for technology, what's your plan to determine what would be cut and what would be kept? And how do you get more community buy-in for the district and for our students for the future?
Great question. Yeah, I'm well aware of that district failing because, again, I'm a voter in the community, right? And so have a very vested interest with family going to school here. I think your first question was about how do we, what do we do with the budget? What are we going to cut and what are we going to keep? And I think that's not an answer I can specifically give, but I could speak to a process for that, right? And I do believe some of that process would be done here coming forward, but depending on the need for, we still need that levy, right? We at the very least need to renew it in Prior Lake. I think we need to have some good conversations here about why the levy, right? What are our neighboring school districts that we compete with and that we compare to, and what their levies are in place? You clearly have been very fiscally responsible in this district in a very good way. Out in your buildings today and seeing, for example, all of the technology in the space, and you've done that without a tech referendum already or tech levy, is pretty much unheard of. So that speaks really highly to high quality fiscal management here, right? Unfortunately for all districts, I honestly don't know of anybody that's not facing a budget shortfall now as a result of COVID and the long lingering, we're still feeling that in all kinds of ways. So that budget reduction or cost containment process is one that needs to be collaborative. Right? It needs to start with, what are some ideas that our community has? What are some ideas that our teachers have? What are some ideas that leaders have, right? And you bring that all into a space and you kind of pare that down. Unfortunately, the district I'm in right now isn't immune to that, and so I'm a part of that piece as an executive team member, and you're prioritizing what those cuts need to be. The other reality is, though, is about 73 cents out of every dollar that we spend, as it should be, is spent on people. This is a people profession, right? And so I think you're looking at about $3 to $4 million in cuts. Keeping it away from part of that 73 cents would be very difficult, if not impossible. So you do have to weigh out, where are those cuts and cost containments going to come from that gets us to that number. You always want the goal to keep it as far away from the classroom as you can, but when 73 cents out of every dollar and you're facing, $3 to $4 million, that's a tough ask, right? Every cut is hard. If it's not, then it really is excess and we didn't need it, right? And so I think part of that also is not only making the cuts, but having the plans in place. So what does that mean now? Right? And how do we recover from that? It's unfortunate here because I've lived a failed referendum in Eastern Carver a couple times, and it is bone crushing, right? And I don't think it's because the community didn't support. Everything I have read and everything that I've lived being here is that this community very much supports our schools. So we have to figure out what happened there, right? And then that will answer the question on what we do next. Right? So I don't know, asked, and I think that's some questions that we can spend with the board on what happened, right? Do we have survey data? What is that saying? And then where do we go forward from there to make sure that at the very least we need to renew that. And that's at the very least. And did I answer both pieces of that? Okay, into the levy piece of it, or I think you have to be out telling your stories. And it's really hard for me to answer that in the sense that I don't know what was done, and the last thing I'd want to do is come off as all-knowing and critical, but whatever was done, something, we missed the mark somehow, right? And whether it's timing of where we're at as a society and a country and all of those things. I've asked around, because I live here, so I've asked around, and I've heard everything from, well, there was a new sign at the high school, and so people, like, what does that have to do with it, right? But having been in education, I know, something like that actually can, right? I shared with the board, I live out on Cedar Lake, I didn't know you had a referendum up and a levy up. Okay, and I don't think that's because I'm completely disconnected, because I'm the type of person that would, obviously, I'm in education. Now, the good news is when I saw it on the ballot, obviously, I'm a yes, right? Because it's what I do, but I do wonder what my neighbors next to me, did they know? So I think you have to start with, we need to figure out as a system, do we have the data that tells us where did we miss our mark and how are we responsive to that? And then how do we get out the vote better the next time, right? So when you talk about how do you get buy-in, I need to know what they did. Was there something they didn't buy into, or did they not know? Was it bad timing? Did they not see the need? Did we not make the case for that? Did the 2 questions thing confuse people? Like, all of those things is really good questions, and we need to have those answers before we then know what that next target is. And then we also get community by getting them involved in selling it. Again, I don't know what was done, but at Eastern Carver, after we had a failed referendum, one of the things I think was most helpful is, as a building principal, all of us had a role. It wasn't like, that's something the district and the board is doing, but we all had a role. We had community outreach. I had a building team of parents, right, that I was informing, and they were having neighborhood parties and everything to explain. Like, you just had to keep talking, because at the end of the day, our custodians, our food service, our paras, that's who's selling our referendums and levy requests. And so do we have everybody with the right information we need? So again, I can't answer those questions at this point, but that would be the questions I would be asking so that we can get that done. And it has to get done, so I want to be, right, we have to at least renew it here.
Okay, let's have another question. Someone have one? Here we go. This must be the roll of questions.
So there's some local discussion concerning curriculum. Some prefer to eliminate diversity training and Black history and a more back to the basics approach, while others prefer to keep and expand upon a more inclusive curriculum. So what is your philosophy on this topic?
Thank you. And your name? Whoops. Use your teacher voice, right? You must be a teacher.
I'll read it again.
Okay.
I'm a retired
teacher.
so my
Okay.
voice okay. There is some local discussion concerning curriculum. Some prefer to eliminate diversity training and Black history and have a more back to the basics approach, while others prefer to keep and expand upon a more inclusive curriculum. What is your philosophy on this topic?
Yep, thank you. Thanks for asking. So again, I'm Executive Director of Teaching and Learning, so this is my world, right? To run curriculum reviews, to look at what we have, and at the end of the day, our curriculum and our teaching practices need to do what's best for each and every learner. We need to meet the students' needs. So that means they need to see themselves in our curriculum, right? They need to see themselves in our activities. They need to, and the data is clear about that. Right? Students are successful when they can see themselves in their learning and in the curriculum that we teach, right? And that we meet them where they're at. So if we want all of our students to be successful, I need to know about that student. I want that as a human, right? When I think about what I want for my child, I want you to know them. And I was blessed that teachers did, right? And I want you to know them in a way that informs your instruction around me. So as a retired teacher, I'm sure that you know that you got to know, were you elementary or elementary? Okay, so you got to know each and every one of those learners, and how you approached them was based on what you knew about them, right? That still holds true. And then we have to make sure that we have the skill sets, whether it's our teaching practices, our pedagogy, our materials, that meets that student where they're at. Right? So we have to be doing that work. Yes, this is a divided topic, and I'm not always sure why. Right? I'm really not. I'm just not always sure. I mean, I know why, right? But I'm not always sure why. I have dealt with in Wayzata book challenges. I've dealt with questions about our social studies curriculum. And what I do find, though, is when I meet and take the time to talk with people and we make a human connection, we can talk about those things, right? So I think part of it is just having conversation and seeing if we can't understand what the work really is, right? Equity work we've been doing forever, meeting kids where they're at, meeting students where that, giving learners what they need to succeed. We've been doing that for as long as I can remember, and I come from a family of educators, right? And so that was kitchen table talk at my family table on doing that. Did that work as a building administrator, do that work now. It's not something that needs to be as divisive as it is. It is, and so we need to talk about that. And I think it's really about when we learn more about what it is, then we find that common ground and can get the work done. I really do. Does that help?
Yes, but how would you promote common ground?
Sure. Yep, I think, again, you have to be out there and listening, and you have to have opportunity to talk. So whether that's coming in and meeting with me, whether that's meeting with our principals, whether that's, having a clear articulated plan, you're working on that here in New Prague right now. So you have your equity, culture, climate committee, and you're working on that. So you have clearly defined understanding of what the work is. And then again, it's about getting out in the community and talking about that. You have to be present and be talking about it and put a face. You have to be willing to listen, right, to that work. You have to engage our classroom teachers, and that's kind of like the same idea around the levy and referendum, right? We have to be talking about it and about what that work is and getting out in front of that. We have to say in New Prague what we believe and what we're going to tolerate and we're not going to tolerate, right? And you're doing that work right now, and then we have to make sure that our systems are aligned to that, and then we just have to be honest that. Are we going to have people that maybe don't always agree with us? Yep, that's going to happen. And hopefully we can be respectful in that disagreement. We need to know our kids are watching us. They're always watching us, right? And so how do we do that in a respectful manner? But we are here to serve all learners from where they're at, and that's just a non-negotiable. And so we can talk about that. We can ensure that we have curriculum and materials in our buildings that look like all students, reflect all students in their learning. that doesn't take something away from anybody else, right? It's not a pie, and so we can make sure that each student is met where they're at.
Okay, any other? There's a question back here.
It is so bright up here, so I'm sorry if I'm like, move. It feels so weird.
Hey, Mary, could you please speak to how you would help to improve the lack of acknowledging a senior's grades in the second semester when determining if they graduate with distinction or high distinction? Right now, their second semester grades do not matter at all. They're not counted, they're not looked at. If the school does not care about the student's grades, why should my student?
Thank you. So you got a couple questions in there, so let me see if I've got it right. Okay, so you're wondering then how, so at the high school there's a practice of the second semester grades not counting towards like their GPA at the end, and then that is used to determine the ranking that they receive. Question? Okay. So, so first of all, I would need to learn more, right? So to say definitively this is how we've done. As a high school assistant principal, we had some of those same discussions. What we did with that is take a look at, because the challenge with that is, and so first I will say I don't think there's anybody that doesn't care about the grades, right? Or that there's teachers that don't care about their grades, so we need to be communicating that. I will argue, though, I care less about their grades and more about their learning, right? But one of the challenges that schools face with that is that all the stuff that happens with graduation, whether it's the program or all the logistical stuff happens before that end of term, right? So one of the questions I would have is, are our seniors getting done in a time that that data could be available and our system be responsive to that? Okay. I had a child who was in that situation, a son on the opposite end of this, who graduated with a color yarn higher than he should have, because again, they didn't factor in that second semester piece of that, right? And so I understand that it'd be much more painful, right, from the other side. So I think we need to find a solution for that, and I think we can find that solution and make sure that it's not the system getting in the way of something we need to do for kids. Another discussion is, do we need to have those kind of acknowledgments and levels? Like that would be a community discussion and a discussion with the high school as well, as what does the need meet and what does that serve us? And is that something that we should be doing at that space? If we can't find a solution that makes it fair and representative of all students, then maybe the system just doesn't work, and we need to see if that's what we have in place. Does that make sense? Follow me? No, I still haven't answered your question, so.
So I guess it comes down to technology as we understand it. You pointed that out. There are things that add up, that accumulate to create the grade. But my child, all of that information was in, and we were told it was just a failure of the system. This is how it's been. This is how it's going to be. How can you change a broken system?
Yep, okay, gotcha. Thank you. Again, it's really hard to stand up here without knowing all the details, but what I will say is I never believe systems should stand in place of us doing what's right, by the learners. Like, we should be driven by the learner. So I'm sorry that happened to you, and if there's a way that we can fix the system, and I gotta believe there is, then that's what would need to happen. And that would be me working with the high school staff and principal there and collaborating with them on that, not coming in heavy-handed and saying, you know, like, here's the answer. But listening to, we have a community member, a student that was harmed by this. How do we make this right? What can we do better and differently? And then get after that. And that's what we would need to do.
Okay, any other questions? Okay.
I don't have my question written down because I didn't think I was going to say anything. But I usually don't have a problem shooting off the cuff. So I was just wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your connection and your experiences and your work with early childhood and elementary. You know, my experience as a primary teacher is that I've almost always, only ever had administrators who have experience in middle school and high school. And that means they don't have that same understanding of what a first grade classroom is like. So we're still not one-to-one at K and 1. You know, we have Mimeo boards instead of smart boards. Like, we are fighting for everything, and we're always having to explain and teach what it's like to be in our world. So I'm just wondering if you can tell us a little bit about some of your connections and some of your experiences to an elementary world, to an early childhood world.
Absolutely. So I'll start with that and then kind of maybe get at the piece of we're fighting for what we need. But so my experience of that, I am a secondary trained person, but I've spent a great deal of time. And I would say I was raised in an elementary classroom. So both of my moms were elementary teachers in a special ed. And then I have a sister that was elementary ed as well. And so that's a world that I lived in. You know, I've cut my fair share of bulletin boards, let's put it that way, and been there on a hot August morning getting things ready. But that being said, in teaching and learning, I am E12 plus. And so both at Eastern Carver and now, I spend just as much time, and honestly, I would say in the last 20 months or so, more time with our E5, because that was an area, the same question they had, right, was how are you going to know more? And then the way you know more is you get yourself there and you learn more. I feel like I could be a reading tutor now because there's all the work out there around, you know, the science of reading and early reading and phonics, and I can talk about the 5 areas and all of that. I've done that. So part of it is immersing myself and learning in that area. Another thing is in Wayzata, it's kind of an interesting dynamic. They don't have a district office. We're kind of splotted wherever they could find space. And so my office is teaching and learning along with community ed, who also oversees our early childhood programming, and special ed are all on the 2nd floor of our early learning center. So I walk in every day through our early learners. And as I was telling the administrative team, like, if you want a high, just go walk through 3 and 4-year-olds. Like, once you can get past, they touch a lot. But once I got past that space, you know, I've really just spent a lot of time in there and learning to understand. The other piece is I have an opportunity this year is we've established built teams, building leadership teams, and there are 3 or 4 of us that go around to every site 3 times a year. So we've done our second one to learn about building. We meet with their leadership team, so teachers and administrators, to learn about what their building goals are, listen to what their concerns are, and how they're meeting those needs. Through that, when the early childhood was doing their presentation, the early childhood director, Michelle, and our Jenny, our community ed director, were talking about, and I'm going to get this wrong, it's like the early equation for success. MDE didn't name it well, but it's really that instead of kindergarten readiness, it's their equation for success before that. And what is super cool about that is they've changed that. Instead of kids being kindergarten ready, it's how is the system ready for every child. Right? So how is the family ready? How is our building ready? How is school ready? And that's where early learning comes from. I think that is genius, right? And that is a way like that we should be talking up through 12th grade and plus, right? So when we're talking about the senior that's at high school, how is the system ready for that student, not how is the student fit into the system we have. So I think part of my learning in early ed has been like, wow, we could be learning a lot instructionally and pedagogically from those teachers, right? Not to mention, like, I spend about 30 minutes walking through there and I'm like exhausted and needing 3 cans of Diet Pepsi before it's done. But so I have spent a lot of time. I lead the curriculum work at the elementary level, and again, so we've been adopting new science curriculum to meet the needs of the new science standards. We're implementing new reading curriculum. We're looking at our intervention models and our gaps and where those are at. And that means I spend a lot of time in teachers' classrooms just, you know, trying to see what they're doing and how they're doing it, and getting in there to learn and having I have teacher coaches that work with me. So I have an elementary reading teacher coach, so taking me into those classrooms, showing me. I have a science person showing that. So it's really been a point of emphasis for me in my growth to answer that exact question that I got in Wayzata too. So I think I'm getting better, but I think I still, like everybody, have a lot to learn, and you're right, my background is secondary.
So what I hear you saying is class size would be capped at like 18.
In the perfect world, yes, if there wasn't for this little thing called funding, yes. Yeah. But you know, even in looking at those, we're doing okay out here compared. You always want them smaller, you do.
Okay, somebody else had a question down here.
Hi, Dana.
Hi.
I'm Ann,
Hi, Ann, thanks.
retired teacher.
Okay.
Easy question for you. Describe how you would work with the principals in the district.
Yeah, okay. You know, the principals asked this too, and one of the things I said is it's one thing nice about having been a principal for about 16 years is I know how I wanted to be worked with, right? And that was, I wanted to have a superintendent who we have a mission and a vision that we all know what it is and we're aligning, it's clearly articulated. And then as building principals, we set goals towards that, right? And then the superintendent's, one of their roles is to support principals in meeting those goals. Okay, so how do I collaborate with you on what you need? How do I understand where you're struggling or where the needs are in your building? Like that's a collaborative piece. And then how do we continue to build your skills? Because here's the answer, right, is we know the two biggest things that have an impact on student learning, and I say this as a teaching and learning person who would love to say it's all this curriculum and it's all this stuff, but it's not. It's the teacher in the classroom and the principal in the building, right? Those are the two biggest levers on student learning. So part of a job as a superintendent is to make sure our principals are hitting at their highest capacity and giving them and supporting them in what they need for that. So I think as a superintendent, I need to be arm in arm with them, listening to their needs, hearing what they've got to say, respecting that, trusting in that, knowing when they just need an ear, right? Because sometimes I just needed an ear, knowing when they need advice, and knowing how to partner with that. It also means we need to get to know each other. I'm really big on the personal. This is a people business, and so we need to have a personal relationship with each other, and so that we know how we tick. That being said, we still have to be aligned as a district as well. So part of my job would be to say, what are those missions and goals, and how do we align E12 plus to make sure and to hold principals and buildings accountable to that? Because again, that's what's best for our learners. So. Yeah. She's saying, how about with regard to?
How about with regard to serious student behavior, negative behaviors?
Yeah. So I think the first thing about behavior is all behavior has a purpose, right? And so one of the things is you start back at that prevention mode. We're not dealing with behaviors when behaviors happen. We need to be dealing with behaviors by having a system that supports student learning and that gets at who our kids are and their basic needs, and are those needs being met, and how do we best meet those needs. So the first thing I'd want to be doing with our principals is what is that work we're doing way in advance of any student, right? What is the training we have for our teachers across the system? What does that look like in all of our buildings? And I'm hoping that it's aligned so that students can have the same expectations in training and learning, because it's something you teach just like you teach anything else. So do our principals, are we aligned in that work, right? But then yes, when there comes a time when a student is having a behavior, if a principal is calling me, again, it's to find out, what do we know about that child, right? What do we know about their needs? What are our practices and policies? Those are always really important. But even when we have to do an intervention to turn that behavior, we need to make sure that we're always doing it with the best interest of that child in mind, right? And how do we reconnect, right? So I tried as a principal, and I would be the same as a superintendent if that was my child, right? How would I expect? I disciplined my kids, right? But it was never without them knowing that I loved them first, and that we were good the next moment and we were going to get through that. And so that's kind of an overarching, like a mom philosophy maybe, if you will. And then my job as superintendent is to help principals be able to unpack that. It's also there to support them, right? Sometimes as a principal, it can get tough sometimes with some parents, or they're getting really, sometimes they just need somebody else to listen to, and I need to be that spot that a principal can say, you know what, how about you talk to our superintendent, and then I do that. And that doesn't mean you're an automatic rubber stamp, but that would be a conversation that principal and I would have separately, right? Give me some information, let me know how can I support you, and if I can't, for some reason, what are we going to learn from that, and how do I do that? Okay. Because I can see my shadow, you're really aware of how much I talk with my hands. So I'm like trying to put them in my pocket.
Okay, any other questions here?
Hi there.
Hi.
I'm just going to comment, kind of more personal to me type of thing. But over the years, career and technical education has kind of been knocked aside, put aside, and stuff like that. And now recently, a lot of school districts are finding out now that what they threw away, they now need back. what's your philosophy on how do you see career and technical education, not just the trade shop type classes, but business and home ec and all those types of things as well?
Yep, great question. One of my backgrounds is in alternative ed, and I share that because one of the gifts of coming from alternative education is we create a system that students get what they need around where their passion areas are. I think some of the reason you're seeing some of this come back is maybe we got away from that a little bit, right? In my current district, we have a pretty strong CTE program that I can't take a whole lot of account, in fact, probably no responsibility for, nor would I want to, but have seen firsthand and doing more and more research as we look to possibly expand that on how critical that work is and is going to continue to be. And I think, I get their names, I hope right, Tom and Brian, the two assistants at the high school, we were talking about that very thing. When I look at the pathways we have here, so we've got health, education, and I think business, one of my questions was, wow, that's interesting. What are we doing around the tech skills when I look at Scott equipment or things in New Prague? Like, how are we making sure that we're supplying graduates for those programs, not only in New Prague, but honestly, preferably in New Prague, right? We want our kids staying here and coming back, but how are we giving kids those skills that they need? And I think we've always known this, but I think that awareness that is a 4-year education for everybody. Is that what we need? And how do we give kids the skills they need to be successful? And they can be a whole, a world successful without necessarily having that. That's great for those who need it, but we need to be able to meet the needs of all of our learners. And CTE, and the other thing that CTE does is it exposes kids so they have some knowledge. Again, I'm a mom of 2 kids who went to college and it took more than 4 years, right? And it took more than 4 years, which means it took more of my pocketbook than 4 years, right? It was because I don't know that they had enough exposure to some really hands-on learning in an area that they could have found out for sure if that was a passion area, right? And so they had to get through school a little bit more. So CTE offers some of that, right? There's excellent opportunities to blend your core curriculum in with those opportunities. So I think that's a field you're just going to continue to see exploding in our schools. And you're right, it's cycling back around. I'm old enough for that. So it's also a funding piece, right? So health career services, for example, it can be pretty expensive to bring a true, really high quality one in there. So that will be the challenges we face, but I think it's a critical piece of learning, and it's a golden opportunity, and it might be a space where New Prague can really set the bar for area schools and continue to make us that school of destination. I think that's a real possibility here. So, you bet.
Okay, any other questions here? Anybody? No? Back there? I'm coming.
Hi.
Hi.
Again. So I'm pretty passionate about diversity, equity, and inclusion work in the school district that I work in, not New Prague, and this area as well. And so knowing both you and the other candidate come from more diverse school settings than I currently live in, how will you meet all students here and help teachers, administration, all staff, and the community grow in their understanding of diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Good question. And a difficult one, right? And yeah, one of the places that I come from in this is a place of, again, and I'm going to sound like a broken record, but it really is the work. Teaching and learning and meeting all students' needs. Each and every student is diversity and equity trained for doing it well, right? And so when we look at our gaps in Minnesota, Minnesota needs to not be okay with that, right? And so again, talking about our teachers and our principals are the key levers, then that means what are we doing to make sure our teachers have the skills to meet each student where they're at? I don't know that I got that training when I was going out 100 years ago, right? So I think the work starts with really strong professional development around this, and it's very individualized. So when you say, like, what are you going to do with the person? It's a journey, right? It's a journey that I've been on. In my building I was at Eastern Carver, our demographics started to change in the time I was there. And I look back on what I thought was really good work that I was doing or that our building was doing that would not be good work today. So it is one of those things where you do good until you know better, and then you do better, right? And so anything that I would say, it's part of coming in. You have started the work of knowing where are people and how do you get better, right? Where is our system and how do you get better at that? I'd like to see us not make it something it's not, right? I would argue we've been doing diversity and equity and all of those things until it became, and we've met kids, worked hard to meet kids where they're at. Now we need to do even better than that, and that's not political, I guess, to just be honest. That's what's best for every student, and it doesn't mean somebody else gets less. So I think in New Prague, we have to make a commitment to that, and we have to say, what does that look like in professional learning? And bring that in. I can talk about what I've done. I can talk about what I've brought to the system. I don't know that there's any one right roadmap for that, but it does start with what are our values and what are we committing to and what are we unwavering on, right? And it does mean community dialogue, and it means it's okay to start wherever you're at. It's just not okay to stay there, right? And so how do we bring people along in that journey? I don't know if that got right at your, okay. Well, I want to knock it out of the park, so let's keep going then.
So this is a little bit different. I guess I would like to know what strengths your staff would say that you possess, and sort of the corollary to that, what would be the challenges of working with you?
That's awesome. I like that. Well, the worst part is they're probably watching this or going to go watch, and they're going to go like, yeah, no, you missed that one. So I would think, some of the strengths that staff I've worked with would say that is my passion, right, and my commitment to learning. That's unwavering, and I do the work to do there. There's nothing in a building or in a position that I'm not willing to do. I was the building principal who was taking out the trash if that's what needed done. And I say that because I think what they're going to say is a strength is I'm a team player, right? I will roll up my sleeves. I'm a good old Iowa farm girl type of experience, right? You roll up your sleeves and you get the job done, and that's really who's here, and that's who's going to be here. I think they would say that I'm a listener. I'm a pretty deep thinker. We do this thing in Wayzata with colors, and that's not here or there, but it's kind of like one of those little personality things, and there's different ones. 3 of my colors are above the line, and that is red, blue, and yellow, right? And I say that because red is the do it now, get it done. So yep, I'm somebody that likes to get stuff done, right? But blue is that really critical, deep thinker that needs their information. And so I think what staff would say to you is, I gather information and I'm deliberate and I pull them in and ask for their thought. I'm very much a leadership by collaboration, if you will, and building those skills up of the team. And then yellow is the personality place. It's okay to have fun in this work. We're a people business, and so it brings that people piece to it. And I think they would tell you that that's pretty accurate of who I am. Like, there's a time and a place to have fun, and there's a time and a place to really do some deep thinking, and there's a time and a place to get it done. And that I think that would capitalize me. And then you asked what would make me difficult to work with. Challenging. Okay, you said it so much sweeter. She's elementary, right? I think at times I can get impatient. And that impatience comes from a fact that we have people whose lives we are impacting every day. And this is serious work. And so when we talk about things like the achievement gap, or we talk about the things, I'm growing impatient. They've been there. I've been in this business now for 30 years. We've been talking about that work for a long time. So I think that would be a space that they might say that I'm really ready to get it done, right? That red energy comes there. Things that would make me difficult to or challenging for me to work with. I do like to gather a lot of information, and so I think sometimes if they're wanting a quicker, sometimes I want more feedback and information, and if you've got an idea, I want to explore that. And I think sometimes people would wonder if, that balance between a quick move and I'll just say, well, we want to make sure we've got it's not the speed of the decision, it's how right we are in that decision, right? And not that I can't make that when the situation calls for it, but I would much rather consider, who are we not thinking about? Who does this decision impact? I want to make sure I've done my due diligence on that. And the worst part is you still usually miss something, but I think that would be it. so afraid I'm going to fall off of this thing. Am I thinking, okay, I'm trying to, you need like bumper.
I guess I have, you guys are obviously all in education, and I would be the parent that is not in education. But over COVID, when the schools were going through what they did, I had a child who was very, very far behind. And I knew I couldn't let him get further behind. And I knew COVID was going to be a very challenging year. So I pulled all 3 of our boys out of the school system, and I chose to do homeschooling. In our homeschooling program, it was extremely detailed, it was a tough program. And every month, we were constantly learning about a different culture, different foods they eat in the culture, different things that those cultures have to face, different diversity. So, I mean, I am all in support of teaching children about different cultures, absolutely. It just seems like what the diversity program is teaching is causing a divide. And I know that maybe people here in this room do not feel this way, but I guarantee you that there are plenty of parents who may be watching that are going to feel the exact same way. How are you going to, I mean, and again, I feel like you're taking away from the education and going more towards how are we feeling, And I feel like if you just stayed focused on the teaching and the education and not so much focus on emotional. And now I realize that you have a lot of parents you are also dealing with who are choosing not to parent. You know, I know you guys are facing a lot of things, but I may be more on the side of understanding why people are taking their kids out of the school districts. And I do feel like the program, diversity program, is focused more on feelings, and taking away from the education of what your guys' jobs are. You are not, I don't feel like you're in the emotional, you're in the teaching. So how would you answer a parent like me?
Well, thank you for sharing. I think one of the things I'd want to, know is those decisions about taking your kids out, right? I'd want to sit down and have a conversation with you a little bit more on what led to that, what is some more. That would be work, I think, when it answers the question, how do we get more people on board? Or understanding what we have in a district. It's sitting down with people who aren't happy or who have made those decisions and finding out the why. So that's not your question, but I want to say it's an important piece of that. One thing that struck me in your conversation, and it would be curious to ask our educators, is that the idea of a diversity program, because it's not a program, right? And so I'd be curious as to what your thought is around that. Like what are you hearing or seeing that feels like a diversity program? Because equity, inclusion, and diversity is teaching and learning. It's in the curriculum, it's in how we address students, not necessarily in any specific curriculum that we do. Right? We want our curriculum to be inclusive, but we can't purchase diversity. We can't purchase, equity training, right? It's how we do things. So I'm curious about what we mean by diversity program. The other piece that struck me is, again, a place that I'd want to know a little bit more information about is that idea around feelings and stuff. What we know about our learners is that it takes an interaction or a balance of relationships and academics. And if you don't have relationships, you can't have academics. It's just, and it's just like any of us. If you don't know me and like me or understand me, then I'm probably not going to succeed in that space. If you look at the workforce, one of the #1 predictors of whether people stay in a job they're at is their interaction with their employee or what they know about me personally. That holds true from we're wired for that, right? Our basic need is to be safe, love, belong. Those are some of our basic needs. So we do need to make sure we're meeting the needs of our students at that space, right? So that they can be academic beings. And so that is part of the work. I think also, if I was to talk to the folks who are educators in the room, post-COVID, there are definitely academic losses, but I think as a whole, what we saw the most of was our students were struggling socially in the space. Like that loss has come in them being able to self-regulate or do school. And so we do have to train train is a bad word. That sounds like they're, but we do have to make sure we're teaching our students how to learn so that they can do that work. And that's, where's my person who asked the elementary question? But that's something that our elementary level, we do a really good job of. We're very intentional about this is how we go here and this is how we teach processes. And we just need to make sure we're doing that through the entire system. So, do we need to be doing everything around emotions and feelings all the time? No, but we do need to make sure that that we understand that they are social beings and we need to meet them on a relationship level so that they can achieve on an academic level. And we need to have those supports in place. I know that's real global because I don't know, specifics, and I'd love to hear more and learn more about that.
Okay, another question from anyone? Oh, here we go. You haven't had a chance. You come next.
Hi, Dana.
Hi.
This is my teacher voice.
Okay.
What apprehensions do you have about coming to the new Prague district, if any? Do you have any concerns?
Yeah, that's a really good question.
Thank you.
Well, on a personal note, like I do live here, right? So one of my concerns is, and it may sound, is that how I separate work from my life, if that makes sense. I grew up in a home with a superintendent and a leader, and sometimes that was really hard. It's one of the reasons I haven't done this until later in my career, is I didn't want my kids to be the soups kid. I lived in a district different than where I taught and led for that very same reason. I loved being able to go and just be a mom. And so one of the things that truly is a concern is can I go to the grocery store with a baseball cap, no makeup, and get my groceries and come back out. And at the same time, I understand that's part of the job, right? So I do have a good grasp on that. But I give everything I've got, so I'm a little worried about my work-life balance in that. I'm worried about how we continue. The tagline you use is it promising tradition, proud tradition, promising future, or something like that, right? I'm worried about how do we maintain sure that we maintain that proud tradition while still projecting us to that next level, right? Like, you do have to continue to adapt to that, and the world is different and education's different. People don't just go to school because they live in the community. They have choices now, and we need to make sure the choice is New Prague schools, and what does that look like, and how do we meet those needs? That's a worry for me, and that's more on a person, maybe not necessarily about New Prague. That's just a worry in general around education, and how are we being nimble enough to respond to what our kids need today. That's a concern I have. But
Okay, we have one here.
All right, so I have a follow-up from this lady over here. I, too, am not an educator, but I can clearly see there's a lot in the room. But it brought up some issues during COVID. You're running to be superintendent, one of 2 finalists. So some of the school board members in our district ignored parents during COVID. Everybody saw the uprising, all right? This poor lady had to pull her kids out of the district. The board members laughed at parents. Some board members right now are trying to block parents from even addressing the board anymore. How will you help to balance parents' concerns with the difficult board members you would have to work with?
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I have watched some of your board meetings from the past. Anybody standing up here doing that needs to have done that. I don't know that was unique to New Prague, right? I think we were seeing that all over the state, all over the country, and I've certainly sat through my fair share of board meetings in the district that I was at. I think here's why I think some of our boards are having to install policies and practices, is because when we're speaking with each other, and I don't care what the issue is or what your opinion is, it has to be done from a place of mutual respect. We can agree to disagree. We can come from different sides of the political aisle. We can be city or farm, but we have to get back. And I say get back because I really do think we've lost our way. We have to get back to a space where we do that in a respectful manner. Right? And so what I saw at times was just people not doing that when I watched those board meetings, right? And so I understand we have to remember that our elected officials are just community folk volunteering their time. And so we need to make sure that we have mutual respect. Now, having said that, the board is there to represent you, right? And so to hear the voices of concern. So I think most boards, and what I saw from watching is the board wanted to listen. We just need to make sure that we're doing that. We have systems in place for that. Most boards have gone to some strategies that I saw being used, right? Which is have your question ahead of time, right? So we know what it is, limiting to time so there's enough opportunity, not allowing personal attacks or defamation. I don't think those are unreasonable, right? What gets tricky, and it's hard, and we wrestle with this all the time, and we're wrestling with I have wrestled with it in my current role where I sit at the board table as well, is that like we can't get involved in that moment in this back and forth. So it's really hard sometimes because you sit there and you don't respond and you kind of have a response. So I think the key piece to that is, and what is asked in my is who's following up with that parent? Because I might not be able to answer that in that moment because that's really not, if we're going to get through everybody and we're going to maintain, like that gets hard. But somebody needs to follow up and we need to practice and policy. So one of the things we do in ours is at the end of the board meeting, we look at what were some of the issues in question and who's best to follow up with that. So for example, if it's a question about some curriculum or something, then I'm the follow-up person for that so that that parent gets a follow-up. And I personally have found it's always best if I can meet with them in person because then we can be a person to person and not behind a keyboard or a screen. I just think we treat each other better. So.
Okay, I'm watching the clock. This is supposed to be done at 5:15. Unless someone has a burning question to ask, I would like to give the candidate some time to make a few closing statements. And before she does that, I'd like to thank the technology man here for taking care of everything. And also thank you as an audience for being here and having some questions for the candidate to relate to. So unless we have one more question, we'll turn it over to her for a few closing comments.
This is, of all the things today, it's these closing comments that I'm struggling with the most because I feel like I should be really prolific and I'm just not. So I did think of some things, you know, the district's going to be faced with some decisions to make. And I trust as a taxpayer in this district that they'll make the right one. And if that's not me, then that means they made there's something better and I hope they do that. So I'm very sincere. You asked again, you know, strengths and what they'd say. People probably say I am who I say I am, or you get what you see, right? So that's why I've had to answer some really tough questions that I know are divided issues, right? And there's going to be people that already are saying like that I don't agree, and I know that, but you need to be authentically who you are because you need to know who you're getting, right? I did put together, you know, so why would it be me? I think I bring a depth of experience to this position, all the way from what it means to be a custodian to executive director of teaching and learning. I've been in a classroom, I've been a counselor, I've been boots on the ground and raised in this. So I think that plethora of experience puts me in a unique position to team with the already amazing leadership and teachers here and move the district forward. I also live here, and why I don't say that, because I want that to be a decision maker, because I do think it brings a different level of commitment, right? I'm not out, I've only been at my current job for about 21 months, and was not out looking for the next job. I really thought that's where I would retire. But when I saw this and heard about this and was talked to, it's the ability to come home, if you will, or to serve the community I live in, and that matters to me. I joke I imagine retiring from here and then continuing to run into people and watch and have that real lived experience, because this is where we've chosen to retire. I know that may seem odd to somebody, but that's what we did. We bought a home here to retire. I speak to I've had a lot of that depth. There's a lot of questions here, and I understand around the equity work and the diversity work and all that, and I've lived those experiences. I had similar, you know, incidences in Chaska and in Jordan that it helps me deeply understand what we're going through as a community here, and that's not who we are. And how do we make sure that that's not how we're reflected, and what does that work mean? I've done that work and continue to do that work. I will say, though, you continue to get better at it. So I'm by no means arrived, and if you think you're arriving at it, then you're not doing good work at it. I also think, you know, I have a good good background when it comes to fiscal responsibility. Even though I haven't been a superintendent, I've been in 2 districts that have faced some of the same challenges we're facing. I've lived that both as a principal level and now as an executive director who sits at the table and helps to make those kind of decisions. I understand that. I joke that general fund versus operating levy, all those things were dinner table talk for me growing up, and so I do know those things, but I also know I have a strong team around me. Very fiscally conservative. I think, again, if you asked about who I am, I'm pretty conservative when it comes to that way, and obviously that's how the district has ran, and I would just continue that piece. So we need to have what we need, but when we go to our voters and stuff, we need to not ask for more than we need. Right? And then when we can make that case, we'll make it well. And I have experience doing that. Again, because I'm a resident of the community, one of the things I look forward to is I'm already at the football games and the wrestling, and I have been in the auditorium, so I look forward to doing that in a space of from a leadership, but I do believe I'm somebody that can be seen and known. I hope the next time we would have a conversation, if I'm hired, is certainly not with me on a stage and you in a seat, but it's hand to hand, shoulder to shoulder, doing this work together. I think that's just who I am. And again, I think it would be a pleasure and an honor. I know that it'd be a pleasure and honor to serve New Pragues and your families and your staff. I think this is a good place. We've got work to do. The challenges aren't going away. But together we can get that stuff done, and I'm excited about that opportunity. So I appreciate you coming out on a really slick, and I think it's Stop Icky night, and meeting me, and I just hope that we have the opportunity to do that some more together. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, and I appreciate all of you being here again. Also, tomorrow afternoon, the same thing will happen with another candidate. And we're going to head back to the boardroom and have the final interview with this candidate. Thank you again.